Recently, I had a conversation on the MRCon Discord with one of the authors who'd written out their scenario, but wasn't sure how to end it. They thought they could do it with a chase sequence, running away from the big bad eldritch horror. That would be very Call of Cthulhu. Or maybe they would write a climactic confrontation using a spell or ritual that the investigators had to perform. Also, very Call of Cthulhu. Or maybe they do something else entirely, like need to help the unfortunate residents of the town being destroyed. Also, excellent. These were all good choices, but the author wasn't sure how to choose between them. It made me realize the reason I think they were struggling is that although they had successfully identified all the possible solutions, they hadn't figured out what problem they were trying to solve. Greetings, Miskatonic Repository. Keeper Heinrich Moore here. We're in the final days of NaNoWriMo, Cthulhu Edition. There have been lots of great scenarios, maps, fiction, and art. Folks have been making connections and helping each other out, and it's been just great to see. But the type of conversation I described just now is one that's been happening a lot. So, I decided to talk about how I approach these questions. Where we are confronted by seemingly equally good design options, which should I choose? Do I write a chase sequence or a big confrontation? Should I list backgrounds for non-player characters at the beginning of the scenario or at the end or whenever they become relevant? Should I have investigators go down the left corridor or the right? These are all fascinating design questions, and I don't want to talk about any of them in great detail. Maybe we'll leave that for a future video. Instead, I want to get meta and step back to look at what makes these decisions so difficult. When I was a philosophy major in college, I learned a term that stuck with me. I've since seen it in a bunch of different disciplines, but philosophy is where I encountered it first. The term is decision procedure. So what is it? Well, as the name implies, a decision procedure is just a means of evaluating between different choices and assessing what makes one choice better than the others. This goes beyond looking at a choice and making a list of pros and cons, the good and the bad. In Call of Cthulhu scenarios, chase sequences are exciting and desperate, but so are climactic confrontations. Rather, a good decision procedure for our purposes tells you not just what is a pro and what is a con for RPG scenarios generally, but why is it good or bad for your scenario specifically. So it gives us a fancy term, but how do we come up with a so-called decision procedure? Well, one way is to ask the question raised at the beginning of this video. What problem are you trying to solve? Let's take another example. Map design. One of the authors on the MRCon Discord wanted in their scenario to provide investigators with a map of a village they were going to explore. Classic. But they weren't sure whether they should number all the houses, describe only the most important buildings, or do something else entirely, like using random encounter tables or describing only what happens in the first building they enter and the second and third and so on. All of these methods work. We've seen them used in published scenarios and campaigns. They're all viable. So, does it matter which you choose? Well, maybe. As with the previous example, here the author identified many possible solutions, but they hadn't worked out the problem they were trying to solve. Without knowing the problem they were trying to solve, they couldn't evaluate which option was better than the others. They didn't have a decision procedure. Now, you might think the solution is simple. Just give whatever the keeper needs. But if all you're trying to do is give investigators a map, well, all of the options do that. That's not a good problem to solve for figuring out your decision procedure. And anyway, you can do better. Ultimately, what a keeper needs depends on the kind of scenario you're asking them to run. Think about what your scenario is trying to do. Think about the feel, mood, structure, and pacing, and then think about how you might answer your immediate design challenge in a way that serves that greater purpose. For instance, when deciding which map to use, you might think about whether your scenario is investigation-heavy and has lots of scattered clues for investigators to find, which might make a fun scavenger hunt. If that's your scenario, then you need to encourage investigators to investigate building by building, room by room. Maybe in that case, you do want to number every building and fill it with something interesting. That's what a lot of dungeon crawling scenarios in Dungeons & Dragons used to be based on, and still are. And it's super fun, and it can work in Call of Cthulhu as well. It worked in the Chaosium campaign Beyond the Mountains of Madness, and in the Sandy Peterson and Mike Mason scenario, The Derelict. You can also see that approach in my scenario, The Great Trap, an actual homage to Dungeons & Dragons in which investigators explore an observatory. Alternatively, maybe your scenario is story-heavy, and there's a few plot points that investigators really should experience in a particular order to allow players to piece together the larger puzzle at the scenario's heart. In that case, don't bother numbering all the buildings. All you care about, and all the keeper running the scenario cares about, is what's inside whatever building the investigators go into first. Because you already know that's where the creepy caretaker with the dark secret lives. We don't see this approach as much in Call of Cthulhu scenarios, which I think is a shame. Bridget Jeffries' scenario, Sorrow and Savo, does this a little bit in giving each of the investigators a problem to solve right off the bat, requiring them to go to a particular location. Or maybe what's important is randomness, a lack of predictability. Maybe that's one of the themes of your scenario. You can reinforce that theme by having random encounter tables for the different buildings, meaning that something unexpected occurs every time a keeper runs your scenario, keeping you and them on their toes. Ultimately, the author decided that the problem they were trying to solve was to keep investigators from wasting a bunch of time looking at stuff that didn't matter. Perfect. They just described the most important buildings, so it was clear which ones the players should focus on. Once again, how you want your scenario to be experienced determines what problems you're trying to solve. And what problems you're trying to solve, that provides you with a decision procedure to choose between different design options. At least, that's what works for me. Find what works for you. Hopefully, though, this video provides you another way of thinking about scenario design. Give it a try, and let us know what you think. I want to thank Zoe Kitten, Brendan, Epic Party Guy, Ben, Mike Thulu, Dr. Colossus, and the entire MRCon Discord community for their help inspiring this topic. If you enjoyed this video, consider joining the conversation on the MRCon Discord. We hope to see you there. Until then, stay tuned for more.